The mother reminded her of a modest brown wren. The next day Marian began her duties as schoolmom to some 20-year-old scholars of the Hedger type. She began teaching them cleanliness along with their lessons. She taught them how to take proper care of their teeth, hair, and nails. In several cases she aroused the antagonism of the mother, but she persisted and was so efficient in every way that finally they left her alone. But Marian, being an ardent Christian, grieved her righteous soul from day to day to think that there was no Sabbath school for her children. She could see that about all they heard at home was card playing and drinking. So she decided to canvass the community and try to organize a Sunday school. It took courage, but she kept at it, and the Lord surely helps those who try to help their fellow man. So she visited every home and was surprised how many of the parents belonged to some church, probably to one back east or at a distance. Many promised to come to allow their children to come. She had about 20 the first Sunday, grown-ups and all, even Mrs. Hedger slipping into the back seat exactly like a scared rabbit. Sunday after Sunday she met with them and soon found some parents capable of teaching classes. Her school grew to 50 or 60 children and parents together. The young man, Douglas Mansfield, was a regular attendant, and she could see during some old hymn or probably a prayer that he would often be moved to tears. One evening after Sabbath school, he walked home with her and told her his story. He had been a wild, carefree youth, and had one day, under the influence of liquor and some bad companions, he had forged his father's name. Without waiting to see what would become of him, he fled to the West. It had now been more than 4 years, and he had never communicated with his home folks. The confession moved Marian very much, and she begged him to write to his mother, and she told him of the pain and silence it must cause his parents. As they were talking so earnestly, the doctor of the community drove past them, a dark, sinister man by the name of Evans, who had paid marked attention to Marian since her arrival, and had become bitter toward Mansfield as a probable rival. One Monday, some of Marian's pupils failed to arrive, and others told of their sickness. She often visited and ministered into the little suffering ones. As a consequence, was thrown into the doctor's company quite a bit, although she tried to avoid him. One day as she left one of the patients' house, she was overtaken by him. He told her of his love for her and begged her to be his wife. She refused, and after pleading in vain, he became furious, told her she loved young Mansfield, and threatened her she would never wed him. She overheard some men talking that night about the doctor at Hedger's, where she boarded. They said that he had drifted there from no one knew where, and of some of the unkind things that he was suspected of doing. He refused to go where they were too poor to pay him. In regard to religion, he was almost an infidel. Then Marian realized why she had never liked him and was glad. The weeks sped by, and the quarantine was finally lifted, and Marian's school opened again with all the children present, except 2 who had gone back to God whom gave them. One Sunday after the Sabbath school was over, Marian broached on the subject that had long been heavy upon her heart. She pleaded with them to organize a church and build a place of worship so they would not have to meet in the schoolhouse. Their hearts being made tender by their recent affliction, they were soon persuaded. Marian had the joy of seeing a church organized with 23 baptized believers. Only 3 more weeks of Marian's school, and she was going back east. They all had learned to love her, and regretted to see the day of her departure arrive. During this time she saw much of young Mansfield and a very little of the doctor. Although Douglas had not yet declared his love for her, he had shown his love for her in many different ways. The doctor was more morose and cynical, as another practicing physician had moved near them. Marian had met him, and he seemed to be a real Christian gentleman. Blessed indeed is that community that has a real Christian physician to minister to its needs. For while the hearts are touched and softened with the sickness and bereavement, what a glorious opportunity to minister also to the sick soul. This new doctor also promised to preach for the new church until they could secure a regular pastor, and their place of worship was being constructed. Marian had planned an entertainment for her kiddies, in which all had parts, and they were thoroughly enjoying the preparation for it. One day, on her way from school, young Mansfield joined her and told her he had written to his parents and had heard from them. They were very anxious for him to return, declaring that they would never have permitted him to leave had they known. He was going home on the following day, Tuesday, and so now he felt free to tell of his affectionate love towards her and ask her to be his wife. Marian promised him as she returned his love, and her heart was filled and full of joy. She had known little love in her early life, for being an orphan she was reared by some of her relatives, who were relieved by her absence. She saw no more of Mansfield, but worked hard the following day to train her children to speak their parts on the program, and on Thursday was rewarded by seeing all do well. Along about 3 o'clock a messenger rode up to the door and handed her a telegram. It took an effort to control herself as she read the letter from Douglas Mansfield, that he was home and his parents had persuaded him not to return. Their love affairs were all a mistake, as he had been reared in such different environment than hers. Marian felt her heart was broken, but her pride came to her rescue, and she never betrayed her true feelings to the wondering children, but dismissed them for the evening with the assurance that on the following day they would have a golden day. Although Marian spent a sleepless night of torture, she was at the schoolhouse at the appointed time Friday. The house was packed, and the doors and windows full of proud parents. All seemed so glad and happy, except poor Marian. It was so hard to bear. When the entertainment was almost over, a surprise awaited her. Young Mansfield entered the door with a sweet-faced old lady on his arm. As soon as possible, he made his way to Marian and introduced the lady as his mother. The excitement was more than Marian could endure, and shock of joy at seeing him. So when the others had departed, she showed him the telegram. It was needless to say that he knew nothing of it, so they tried to trace it back to its origin. A boy finally gave it away that Dr. Evans had paid him a handsome price to deliver it to her, but the doctor himself was nowhere to be found. The lady where he roomed said he had left with all his belongings early that morning, and that she had heard nothing from him. He had probably thought that when Marian received the telegram, she would return east, and he could then separate the lovers. But his plans failed. Marian left the next morning in company with her husband and his mother, for he had insisted they be married here among the people whom she had loved and helped to raise from their backward ways. She left them with joy in her heart, conscious of being of service to God and humanity, and with the sweet strains of the song, God be with you until we meet again, coming from the hearts of her Western people. Written by my mother, Garnet Bingham Stevenson, who was married to Alton Stevenson in Grant County, Kentucky, and both of them born around Zion Station. And this was a sophomore in 1926 when she wrote this. Um, Shortly after that, she married my father, and we eventually grew up on Wolf Road. Dad was a railroader. Mom worked at part-time and sometime full-time at U.S. Playing Card, I believe it was, in Cincinnati. And she was one of 6 children. 5 of them, the remaining 5 children, Mom was the first. She left after that 10th grade to marry Dad. And I think she was 16. She had 5 children: Barbara Brandner Stevenson, who went on to be a school teacher, retired, and now has gone on to heaven. And Gerald Stevenson, my brother, who's retired from Formica Corporation and plays in the Whosoever Will group band with us, and is very active in his church at Oak Ridge Baptist Church with Randy Wallace, the keyboard man with the Whosoever Will group, and several other members. And my sister Mary Ruth Robinson, who has been in the band, the Robinson Family Singers, for almost 40 years, traveling the United States, playing and singing, and making their entire living with their 5 children on the road. It's the Robinson Family Singers. In fact, they went on me with my very first campaign trip in 1975 across Kentucky. So we visited all 120 counties that year, and they went on into the entertainment field, and we enjoyed a trip across Kentucky when I first ran for Commissioner of Agriculture after leaving the staff of Congressman John Breckinridge, which I enjoyed very, very much for several years. And then my little sister Judy Stevenson, Judy Felty Stevenson, who was also a school teacher, who lives up in Ohio and is still in the farming business, raising horses and cattle and training them. She's a horse whisperer, her and her husband Don Felty. They both do an excellent job at it. And then this, of course, is John Stevenson, and still live out on the little 2 acres here, right up the street from my brother, who has 2 acres on the old homestead here, where we both grew up with Mom and Dad on Martin and Moffett Roads. And it's been a pleasure to be able to read these verses for you. I received them as a gift from my Uncle Don Bingham and Aunt Frederica Bingham. And they gave me the little book called 9 Stars, which these were written in. And it was a literary magazine by the sophomore class of Crittenden High School. And their name of their senior play that year was A Prairie Rose. 1926 was when this was done. And I thought that some of you viewers and listeners would like to hear something that a sophomore wrote back in those days. I know that it played a major part in my life, with my dad being both a whistler and fiddle player and French harp player, and my mom being a pianist for the church and a Sunday school teacher for many, many years, and all 5 of her brothers and sisters being school teachers, one at the University of Kentucky and the others at Grant County and Carroll County. Aunt Ruth and Uncle Gerald and Uncle Don and Aunt Frederica, Uncle Wilbur, Aunt Pauline, all Binghams, Uncle Hugh and Aunt Betty. Uncle Hugh just passed away, and he was in his 90s. And Aunt Betty, I believe, is still alive down in North Carolina. And Aunt Ruth and Uncle Gerald Eckler had the Tandy and Eckler Funeral Home down there in Carroll County. But it's been a real pleasure, and might say Dad's 2 sisters were both teachers in one-room schools also. My Aunt Beulah and Aunt Mary, they're in Sherman, died very young, both of them, of cancer. Dad's dad died when my dad was just 5 years old. He was killed on the very railroad that Dad worked on, in the same place where Dad worked on what was known as the southbound hump, and where I worked my first 3 years on the L&N Railroad as a switchman and retarder operator. So some interesting stories there. And we grew up the first 7 years of my life on Wolf Road in Taylor Mill. Had some wonderful neighbors and friends there. The Halberstadts, the Exlers, Bobby and Bill, and the Culbersons, Henry and Ruth, the Williamses, Ricky Williams, and all kinds of Williamses in the family there. And just had a wonderful time there. And Dudley Martin, oh my gracious, just Gary Halberstadt, had some wonderful friends there on Wolf Road. And Donald Williams and all those folks. It was a great time. But then we moved out on the farm, a little 12-acre farm, where we raised almost everything that we ate. Had our own Daisy cow, and raised our garden crop, raised our tobacco, sold that, and grew up right across the hill from the Cassons. They had 16 children over there, so we were never without friends in the country. Of course, two of my best friends were Jimmy Noakes and Eddie Smallwood, lived on Martin Road here, and they still are today. Eddie went on to be a associate superintendent down in Florida of schools, and of course I went on to be superintendent of schools here in Kentucky, the last elected one. And my best friend, the Hammonds, Gil Hammond, he went on to be associate superintendent of education under the term of Alice McDonald, and is also a Baptist minister and owns the Christian radio station. And the smartest move he ever made was marrying Jan Hammond, who was a professor at Northern, school teacher, and manages the radio stations. And the smartest move I ever made was marrying Miss June Guyman Stevenson. You all have probably heard me say that before on my shows. And she's from Campbell County. She was the daughter of Andy and Anna Mae Guyman, one of 9 children. And we have some happy families. I have 5 children of my own. Colleen Michelle and Berlou, and Holly Johnson, and Pamela Archambault, and my son Guido, or Guy Stevenson. His wife, his name is Amy, and Pamela's husband's name is Bo. I have a grandson there by the name of Ike, and another great-grandson by the name of Lincoln, which is the grandson of Samantha, or the son of Sam. And then I have another grandson, Cody, and Dalton, and Peyton. And Peyton's a senior at Simon Kenton High School this year. And then I have Tegan, which is Guy and Amy's daughter. She's a freshman at Northern Kentucky University, Tegan Stevenson. And I'm trying to think if there's any others there I have not mentioned. I don't think I've forgotten anybody. Samantha, of course, and Courtney. Courtney is a junior at Connor High School, and wonderful young lady. Samantha's a wonderful young lady. She's married to her husband, is over in Iraq right now, and they have one child named Lincoln, named after Abraham Lincoln. And of course, I've got one grandchild, Ike, Bo and Pam's son, who's named after Eisenhower. So we got some politics in the family, that's for sure. But you'll see some pictures float by here with some of them, and hope you enjoy the little show about travels with the Stevensons, John and June Guyman Stevenson.